Hello, how are you doing? It's gotten very chilly here in London, so definitely jumper weather, or as Americans would say, sweater weather, as I used to say actually. What nationality am I anymore? American, British, somewhere in between. I don't know. Anyway, I have a big pile of new books that I'm so excited to talk about because I think so many of these titles sound really interesting and some of them are really beautiful, so I want to show them off on camera. Many of these books publishers kindly sent me. Others I went and bought myself from bookshops because I think they sound so intriguing. A couple of the books I actually got in goodie bags at book prize parties that I was invited to. So yeah, a lot of good new books to talk about. Also want to say this video is very kindly sponsored by Serious Readers. Now, I don't often do sponsorships and I hope you don't begrudge me doing them. I talked about in a video recently how I do all this bookish stuff online because it's a passion of mine, which is absolutely true. I do earn a bit of money from it now, which is really useful in terms of being able to actually make more videos and also help me live because it's gotten much more expensive, just the cost of living these days, hasn't it? So yeah, I hope you don't begrudge me doing this, but I wouldn't talk about products or things that I don't really believe in or I'm interested in. And anyway, yeah, I'll talk about that more later. But first off, I have a very, very, very special book I want to show off, which was very kindly sent to me by SP Books, which is a specialist publisher that does these manuscript editions of different classic books. And they've just released this new version of 1984 by George Orwell, and this is the manuscript version of it. So it comes in this absolutely beautiful box, and I love the decoration on the cover of it. Then you slide it open and you see the manuscript on the inside. These are limited to 1,000 editions of the books, and they're all numbered. And you look inside, there's a whole introduction to it, but then you see the facsimile version of George Orwell's manuscript as he wrote it. And you can see there are a lot of things crossed out. So if you are passionate about this novel, it is so fascinating to see what he originally wrote for it and then crossed it out, and the new things that he wrote in. And so this is a manuscript that was kind of cobbled together from a number of different sources, and George Orwell wrote this shortly before he died, so he's kind of racing to finish this novel, and there were different sections of the manuscript in different places. And so yeah, some of these are kind of typescript version which he corrected, others he manually wrote out and then crossed out and put in new things. And yeah, so absolutely fascinating to look through. I mean, these books are very expensive, so it's a very special treat if you get it for yourself or for a loved one. I read 1984 many years ago, and I've been meaning to reread it, and I think it'll be so fascinating to do that while also flipping through this manuscript version and seeing his original draft of this book. Now, a couple of years ago, one of my favorite books that I read that year was The Eighth Life by Nino Haratischvili, and I loved it so much. I did an interview here on my channel with the author and the translators. I wasn't paid for doing that. I was just so excited to talk about the creator of this great big immersive epic and the interesting challenges that two translators had in bringing it into the English language. Now, Nino Haratischvili has brought out a new novel called My Soul Twin, this absolutely beautiful edition, much shorter than that other book, but I'm so excited to read it. It's been billed as kind of a modern day Wuthering Heights and this tempestuous romantic relationship between a woman and her adopted brother, and so following the journey of that relationship. And yeah, the way that this author writes about her characters and their psychology and their relationships to each other in this very dramatic way, and sort of casts them in these specific historical periods and how that has an effect upon these relationships. It's so interesting. And yeah, just look at how beautiful this edition is. And I love the marbling of it. And if you look on the inside of it, the hardback is kind of carries on that marbling, and it's just so beautiful. Another new novel from an author I've really enjoyed reading before is Losing the Plot by Derek Owusu. I read his debut novel called That Reminds Me, which was this really beautiful blend of kind of fiction and memoir and poetry. And I think this book is very much in that sort of same vein, where the author is exploring his mother's history of moving from Ghana to the United Kingdom. And so following that journey, and two different narrative threads. I think one is in his own voice, and in the other, he recreates his mother's voice. And so, yeah, exploring that relationship with the past and colonialism and, all of these different issues. And, just such a fascinating writer. So really excited to read this. Now, as I've talked about in previous videos, and I know so many of us feel the same way, the ongoing war and conflict in Ukraine is really distressing and concerning. And naturally, I want to follow a lot of news about it, but I also want to know about how this is actually affecting the lives of people who live there. And there's a new book which has come out called You Don't Know What War Is by Yeva Skalietska, who was a 12-year-old girl at the beginning of this year when the conflict broke out, and she recorded her actual experiences during this period of invasion, and how it affected her and her family and the life in her country. So this is showing that actual experience. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating as well as heartrending to read about this. Ruth by Guillem Viladot. This is a new, very short novel from Catalonia, and the story describes the central character's process in transitioning from a man to a woman, and the issues that raises regarding liberty and identity, and the character's relationship to gender. Strega by Johanne Lykke Holm. This is described as a gothic novel about a group of young women that go to work in a grand hotel in an alpine town, and how they form bonds there and start expressing themselves, but also how when the hotel fills with guests, the relationships they form with the guests, a dramatic occurrence that occurs, a girl that goes missing. Describing that process sounds like a great book to read in the winter months. And also the great author Olga Rovin, who wrote the novel The Employees, she says of this book, Strega is the kind of book Lolita would write if she wrote like Thomas Mann. So I love that description. Also on the inside of the book, I love this soft purple color. Idle Burning by Rin Usami. This is another very short new novel about a female high school student that develops a massive crush and obsession around this male pop star. He's just her absolute idol, but then when a scandal surrounds him, it completely disrupts her whole sense of the world and her place in it, and so it's looking at that kind of fandom culture. As I mentioned at the beginning, this video is very kindly sponsored by Serious Readers, a company that creates high-quality reading lights for indoor use, like this one right here. Now, I don't often take on sponsorships, and I've never accepted a sponsorship about a physical product before, but when they got in touch with me, it seemed like perfect timing, because here in England at the moment, it's getting darker during the day a lot sooner, and it's frequently cloudy and rainy. I often read here in my spare bedroom during the daytime, but also at nights when I'm trying to get back to sleep. So I need better lighting than what I can get from the window, because the natural light is way too dim, but also at nighttime the overhead light is way too bright, especially because I'm reading with the hope that I'll get back to sleep. Ideally, I only want the pages of my books illuminated, and that's what the Serious Lights range does really well. I've now used it many times, and I find it really helps me to see the pages of my books a lot better. You know, when I was younger, I would read by dim light all all the time and didn't care, even though my parents warned me not to. But now that I'm getting a bit older, it's getting harder to see the pages, and I know it's not good to strain to see what I'm reading all the time. What's special about Sirius lights is that they replicate the daylight spectrum as close as technically possible with what they call daylight wavelength technology, so the light feels warm and natural. The Sirius lights range includes 3 different types. Here I have a high definition table light in white with the lightweight base. Its neck is very easy to manipulate and angle, so it shines exactly where I want it. Additionally, there's a dimmer switch, so I can easily make the light brighter or weaker. And I can also adjust the beam width, so more or less space is illuminated. I'll put a link to the Sirius Reader's website in the description below, so you can go and check them out for yourselves. And if you decide to buy one, I have a special offer for you. When you go to checkout, be sure to put in the offer code ERIC22, as this will give you a free compact light, which is valued at £150 with any purchase from the Sirius Lights range. And this offer also provides you with free international shipping. I was so glad to get a compact light as well, because this makes a great desk lamp for my study. In this room, I don't have much natural light at all, so I love that this allows me to illuminate the books I'm reading while sat at my desk. I received my lights very quickly after I ordered them, and they came packaged in a way which made it easy to open and immediately start using them. It was also lovely that the packaging slip came with this customized bookmark to peel off and use. Isn't that cute? So I'm honestly so happy with using these lights for my reading, and I'd definitely recommend them. But now back to the books. Next, I have a couple of titles which are reprints of classic books. So first off, there's A Wreath for Udomo by Peter Abrahams. This is a novel which was first published in 1956, but it's just been reprinted in this gorgeous new edition with an introduction by the great writer Patina Gapa. And Peter Abrahams was a Black South African writer, and this story concerns an African man that moves to London and there gets involved with a revolutionary community of exiled Africans. So he gets involved in this political activism, but it also follows his romantic encounters and his emotional story. And so yeah, I think this sounds absolutely fascinating. Then there's a reprint which I think will be really great to read this season in this weather, which is Winter in the Air by Sylvia Townsend Warner. And this is a collection of short stories by a really fascinating writer. I mean, I haven't absolutely loved the fiction I've read before by her, but it's really intriguing and interesting. Her point of view, the way she writes about the psychology of her characters and the social settings that she writes about. So obviously this involves a number of different characters and situations, but she writes about tradition and transgression in our society in a really fascinating way. And also I love on the inside cover of this, there's a little picture of a fox. So yeah, it's just a lovely new edition. The Sandstone City by Elaine Canning. This is a novel primarily set in Belfast, but it follows the story of a man who's just recently died, and he's in his coffin, but he feels like he has unfinished business in his life, particularly to do with his granddaughter, who's experienced a lot of trauma in her life, and she's wanting to move to Spain. So he has 40 days in order to try to sort out his relationships and issues to do in her life before he leaves life for good. I've become quite keen on fiction to do with the afterlife since I loved the novel The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida so much. There are also a couple of new reprints of William Golding books, and Faber have been reprinting all of his work, I think. So first is a collection of 3 very short novellas or very long stories, which is The Scorpion God. And these are all stories which are set in the past or the distant past, or kind of mythical version of the past. One of them is set in Egypt and another is set in ancient Rome. Then there's the novel Free Fall, which is about a artist who becomes very successful and famous, but then becomes involved in World War II and going to fight in that. And he becomes becomes a prisoner of war, and so it's following his experiences of that and how that shifts his view of the world. There's a new anthology called Poetry Unbound, 50 Poems to Open Your World, and this was inspired and based on a very popular podcast of the same title, Poetry Unbound, which examines different poems, and the curator and author of this volume is the presenter of that podcast. And so 50 different poems by different authors are reproduced in this book, but then there is also commentary by the author of why these poems are so moving and so relevant to us. Next, I have a couple of new books by famous men that are no longer with us. So there's Paul Newman's memoir, which he wrote while he was alive, but which his widow has sort of collected and put together in this new volume. And Paul Newman was such a fascinating man. I mean, he was a great sort of activist and believer in charitable causes, but was also, I think, one of the greatest actors that we ever had. My husband and I had a sort of home season of watching a number of his movies during lockdown, and yeah, he's just so good. A previously unpublished novel and group of short stories by Leonard Cohen is being brought out in this new book for the very first time, called A Ballet of Lepers. So before Leonard Cohen became such a great and famous musician, having penned so many iconic songs, he was a writer, publishing fiction as well as poetry, and so yeah, this is the very first time the general public are seeing this novel and short stories, which I think will give such a different light on his music, looking at his creative work in this way. The new edition of Granta magazine has just come out. This volume is called Sister Brother. I always enjoy flipping through this magazine because it includes fiction from great current authors. In this edition, there is new fiction from Colin Barrett and Andrew Miller, Lauren Groff and Sarah Baum, but as well as fiction, it includes artwork and photographs as well as poetry, and I think there's some cartoons in this as well. So yeah, just really interesting to read over a long period of time. The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sara Grand. This is a fantasy novel about a rare book dealer who learns about this legendary lost 17th century manuscript of a book which is meant to be the most powerful book about the occult which has ever been written, and there's lots of very wealthy people that wants to get their hands on this manuscript. So this rare book dealer goes on this quest to find this illusory manuscript, or whether it even exists, but then encounters a lot of trouble along the way. It sounds absolutely gripping. Then there's a reprint of a sci-fi novel from the early 90s called Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, and this was one of the first books to discuss the idea of the metaverse. And so the story is set in this world where people have these online avatars, but then this mysterious drug gets introduced to this world which kills off these avatars but also affects the real lives of the players controlling these avatars, so follows that very dramatic story. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've been to a number of different book prize events in person recently, which was really fun, and at the end of a couple of these events we were given goodie bags with books inside of them. So first off, the Women's Prize had an event sort of in anticipation of next year's awards cycle, and there was an interview with one of the judges, and it was really lovely. But we also did this very fun activity where we were icing biscuits, and I was there with Anna James and Lena Norms, and yeah, just we had a really fun time, and we were icing biscuits that were either some favorite books of ours or books that were some of our favorite winter reads, or I picked a book that I anticipate being on next year's Women's Prize list, Demon Copperhead. So yeah, that was really fun to do, but we also got this goodie bag in their new tote bag, which is really beautiful, and in this goodie bag was a copy of this collection of new short stories which I'd not come across before, called The Haunting Season, and these are gothic tales all set around the winter time by some really great contemporary authors, including Imogen Hermes Gower and Natasha Pulley, Jess Kidd, Laura Purcell, Purcell, Andrew Michael Hurley, Kieran Millwood Hargrave, and Elizabeth McNeil. I love Elizabeth McNeil's historical novels. So yeah, and it's just a really beautiful, gleaming book, and yeah, it'd be really fun to read some of these short stories over the winter season. I also went to the award ceremony for the British Academy Book Prize for Global Cultural Understanding. Very long title for a book award, but I made a whole video about this year's shortlist and how I've read some of the books listed for that, which were very good. But the winner of this year's award was When Women Kill by Alia Trabuku Zoran, and I've not read this nonfiction title yet, but I have read Zoran's novel The Remainder, which I thought was really powerful, so I'm still really looking forward to getting to this, and it was really exciting to see her win. And at the end of the evening, I got another tote bag, a goodie bag, which had in it this book, A History of the World in 100 Objects by Neil MacGregor. And this actually ties in with another book award because Neil MacGregor was the chair of this year's main Booker Prize. And actually at the award ceremony for the Booker Prize, after it was awarded, I coincidentally got a chance to chat a bit with Neil MacGregor, like off camera. I asked him a question in a sort of press interview afterwards, but also was chatting to him for quite a while because there was a lot of confusion about where he should go before this interview, and I just happened to be introduced to him and was sort of standing around talking with him, and it was really interesting to hear him say that before the judges went into their meeting to decide who was going to win this year's Booker Prize, all of them agreed that it could have been any of the books on the shortlist. So it really came down to those last deliberations that they had. I meant to discuss this in my video of my vlog of the evening that I went to, but for some reason I've just forgot to mention it. But yeah, anyway, he wrote this book because he is the director of the British Museum. So he goes through 100 different objects and looks at their history and what it says about the history and the time periods they originated in and the cultures that they came from. I don't know how much he deals with the issues to do with colonialism and the whole controversial issue of certain objects being in the British Museum at all when they were kind of stolen from different cultures and countries. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he actually tackles that or not. But also he's sort of an expert in these different objects. So as artifacts and signifiers of different cultural periods in different countries and time periods. Yeah, I think it's going to be so fascinating to read through this. So those are all the books I want to talk about today. Yeah, quite a big haul, lots of interesting titles. I would love to know if you're interested in reading any of these books now. Please let me know about that in the comments below, or if you have read any of these books and would recommend I get to reading them soon, and I'd love to hear about that as well. But thank you for watching me discuss all of these books. I hope you're doing well, keeping warm, and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.